Greetings, welcome to the Dividing Line. My name is James White. We're in the AO Max studios today. We're going to be doing some teaching. I listened to an exchange that took place sometime over the past number of weeks between Anthony Rogers and Officer Tatum, as he is called, the Officer Tatum, I think, on Twitter, and was once again reminded of the need that we all have for basic foundational convictions in regards to the person of Jesus Christ, how very important that is. So we're going to be looking at that first. Before we dive into that, tomorrow I do intend on being in the other studio. There's obviously things that happen every weekend that catch our attention. The rise of the totalitarian state right in front of our eyes is something I was getting out of the car and I heard, you remember, it was 2 weeks ago that another $1.92 trillion of funny money was erupted out of the bankrupt federal government in the United States. And, you know, I realize most people, especially young people, do not understand that the United States government can't make money. And when this type of thing happens, our great-great-grandchildren are not going to be paying this because there won't be a United States for our great-great-grandchildren to live in. It will have collapsed. And, you know, that used to be what I would hear when they were talking about hundreds of millions of dollars. But once you start talking about trillions of dollars, someone's trying to take the nation down and do so permanently. And so I thought I had turned that off. And so as I was getting out of the car, I literally heard someone saying, did you hear this? That they're now talking about another $3 trillion. That'll make over $8 trillion in 1 year. And if you can't sit back and go, $8 trillion, vast majority of which is going directly into the pockets of the most radical leftist movements in the United States. I mean, it's all pork. Very few people in the United States are actually benefiting from this other than the ultra rich as it is. If you can't sit back and go, what in December of 2019 could have ever been used as an excuse to produce $8 trillion worth of debt all going to radical leftists? You know, there's an old saying, follow the money, and no one seems to want to do that because of the religion of safism. Yes, there are many people in our land today who have wholeheartedly converted to the religion of safism, and as long as the people printing the money say, we will use this to keep you safe. Now, they can't, and they're not, but as long as they say they are, everybody's good with it. We'll talk about that a little bit more tomorrow because we now have the vaccination passports coming, which I've been talking about for a long, long time, and now here they are. And a bunch of civil libertarians are going, if we dare go down that road, we're done. It's not just where are your papers. It is we own you, we own your soul. We own your body. We can put anything into your body. We can determine what you put into your body, where you go, who you see. We have 1,000% control over you. That's where we're going. And it's happening. Calling it the social credit score is the really innocuous, nice, easy, simple way of doing things. It is it's totalitarianism. It's Orwell sitting back going, man, I never thought about the level of technology that could be used here. And that's where we're going. And the religion of safism is right at the beginning. I had a t-shirt on earlier, and I switched out to this because the fact of the matter is, you get to my age, t-shirts are tough. I can do it in the other studio because I can hide. But I had a real nice, and I appreciate the folks. I don't know if any of you saw last week when we were in this other studio, I had a nice t-shirt on that Jeffrey Rice had arranged to get for me. I guess the folks are going to be displaying at G3, so I'll get to run into them there, and I'll try to remember to bring my shirt then. But it was that post mill thing last week, and I forgot to mention it. Sorry about that. And then another group sent me "Obey God, Defy Tyrants," and that's what I was going to wear today. It just didn't go with the cameras and things like that. But it's a really, really good statement, because we are going to be facing tyranny, and there are not going to be many people that are going to stand against it. They're just not, because it's going to come fast, it's going to come hard, and most of us, myself included, honestly, it was one thing to defy tyranny when you lived on your own land and could raise your own food, and technology was such that you could fight off the local sheriff. That's not the case anymore. That's just simply not the case anymore. We live in cities. We're dependent upon transportation. Look at the disruption to the entire global economy over one super ship that gets blown sideways in a dust storm. I guess that's what I heard. Is it was a dust storm, and this thing Al Mohler was talking about today on the briefing is huge. I mean, it's a floating city. It's much larger than even the largest cruise line things. Oh well, it's tall. It's longer than the Empire State Building laying down. It's just massive and huge. But good old weather system came through and turned that baby sideways. And look at the disruption to the world economy that's come just from something like that. It's a very fragile thing. Anyways, we'll talk about that tomorrow. I've already spent 7 minutes talking about it today, though. So that's one of many things we'll be looking at, including the utter lack of transparency in the current regime, which you'd expect. Regimes are regimes. They're not administrations. They're not supposed to be transparent. That video of Ted Cruz at the border was that woman would make the perfect Stasi prison guard. Okay, that's the mentality, the mindset of these people. They're sold out to totalitarianism. It's those are the people we used to be fighting, and now they're in control. That's where we are in the United States. Sorry to the rest of the world that has been so benefited by our standing against this stuff. We're not going to be doing it anymore. Just all there is to it. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that. Now, defy tyrants, obey God, defy tyrants. Why? How would you even know what God has to say? This is where the world is today. And so the theology that we're going to be talking about today actually has great relevance to the defying of tyranny. Why? Because what concerns Big Brother about Christianity is what Orthodox Christians believe about who Jesus is. They are not concerned one whit about leftist liberal Christianity, because leftist liberal Christianity is their ally. And leftist liberal Christianity doesn't believe Jesus rose from the dead. Leftist liberal Christianity doesn't believe in the Trinity. Leftist liberalism doesn't believe in the inspiration of the Bible. So leftist liberal Christianity, don't even count that. That's not even in the mix. It is old style, historically orthodox Christians that scare them to death, because we actually believe in the deity of Christ. We believe that God, we believe in Emmanuel, God with us. We believe that the Word became flesh. We believe that they crucified the Lord of glory. We believe with Thomas, my Lord and my God, which means that I have an authority above any magistrate, any Supreme Court, any president, I have a much higher authority to appeal to that not only is higher to me, but the worst thing is, as Acts chapter 17 tells us, and again, this text amazes me, but as Paul said on Mars Hill, the resurrection is proof that God is going to judge by the one man he has appointed, Jesus Christ. And that means every magistrate, every soldier, every cop, every judge, every mayor, every governor, every president, every senator, yeah, even Jerry Nadler. Jerry Nadler is going to stand before God someday, and God's going to play that video clip. That God's will has nothing to do with this Congress. And Jerry Nadler gets to answer for that. Yeah. So there's the problem. And Caesar had that problem. Caesar was very concerned about this Jesus and about this idea. But what's at the foundation of that? I had somebody on Twitter yesterday. It's funny. I went ahead and I fought back to a few people on Twitter. Sometimes I just ignore it. Sometimes you have to. You don't have time to worry about it. But there are a few people making their nasty comments. And so I fought back against a few people. Why don't you back that up? Why don't you document your false accusations and your lies and things like that? And normally they run off with their tails between their legs because they're just, they're just doing the things you do on Twitter. But this one guy was going, I used to appreciate all his apologetic material, but now, all he does is talk about politics. Anybody who watches this program is going, really? Is that so? I think he started talking about the homosexual thing back in 2000, maybe a little bit before then, before he wrote the book on the same-sex controversy, yeah, and warned that this type of revolution was going to have certain ramifications to it. Yeah, well, we did. But here is where all this meets, because the fact of the matter is there are people who are going to tell us that while Jesus was an important prophet or teacher or whatever terminology you want to use, that he certainly wasn't God. He was just God's representative, as many other men have been representatives of God. It is a belief in the historic understanding of the Christian people, going back, as we have documented on this program for decades, to the very text of the New Testament, but it's also the fundamental assertion of the earliest documents of the Christian faith outside the New Testament. It is plain that for Clement of Rome, Jesus is God. Ignatius calls him God 14 times. Ignatius is the one that has Trinitarian language. Ignatius approaches the Council of Chalcedon in the depth of his Christology of Jesus as the God-man, the hypostatic union. And that's in 107. It didn't take till 451 for that to develop. It didn't take till the Council of Nicaea in 325. And so we have that historical reality. But Christians stand first and foremost upon that which is theopneustos, that which is God-breathed. And that is what is found in Scripture. Over the weekend, I had to run out and see the dentist. We had a crown. I originally, the crown. See, this makes sense as a Calvinist. I found out the crown was a 4-point crown, and there was the problem right there. If it had been a 5-point crown, it would have been fine. But it became a little less orthodox about 10 minutes after the last dividing line. It became a 3-point crown, and so. I got hold of my faithful dentist who's been keeping my teeth in my head for 20 years now, and he had me come out Friday morning, and it didn't end up being any big thing. We just smoothed it down and said, you're getting so old, let's just see if it lasts a while. It's the easiest thing to do when you're got this much white stuff on the beard. But anyway, as I was driving out and coming back, I listened a couple times to an exchange that took place. Anthony Rogers Christian Trinitarian, got hold of, I guess, Instagram and TikTok are two things I've never gotten into. I think it's just because of the, I don't know, you have to, if most of it has to be done on this, I'm just not interested in it. It's too small for folks my age, and I'm not interested in getting one of those phones that's the size of an iPad. So I'm just not getting into this stuff. But there ended up being a exchange on Instagram, and so I listened to it on that trip back and forth, and there wasn't anything new. I have yet to come to an understanding of where Brandon Tatum is as to a positive confession of faith. Aside from denying the doctrine of the Trinity, he quoted from people on the extreme opposites as to why they deny the Trinity. He quoted from Anthony Buzzard, and he quoted from Oneness Pentecostal sources like David Bernard. Now, David Bernard and Anthony Buzzard do not believe the same things. In fact, they believe the exact opposite things. So if you're quoting from that wide a variety of sources, may not really know why you're quoting from that wide a variety of sources. That's one of the issues. But at the same time, there was a great deal of discussion that I don't know that a lot of people would have followed. And so to my homeschooling moms, I'm hoping that your older kids will be able to follow this, honestly. We're going to be talking grammar. And we're going to be talking about the stuff that you guys talk about in your homeschools, because I know homeschoolers actually talk about grammar. They're concerned about the English language. And we're going to be talking about, for example, one fact. I've told the story before. Let me tell it again. This is good for our homeschool families. And, of course, my daughter homeschools my grandkids. And so hopefully Cadence and Waylon and Clementine, minimally, Janny, you can listen in too, but hopefully they'll all get something out of this. But I remember I think it was 8th grade. It might have been 7th or 8th grade. It was junior high school, Deer Valley Junior High School. There were 2 English teachers. And I got the English teacher that graduated from Berkeley. So she was the quintessential 1960s hippie, okay? And she was fun. Ms. Stickley, I think, was her name. And so we got to do plays and Shakespeare and impromptu acting, and it was sort of fun. And at the time, we're all like, oh, the other teacher. We heard about the other teacher. She was old school grammar, and we're all like, oh, whew. I'm going to tell you something. One day, the classes switched. And we got a taste of what it was like to be in the other teacher's class. And I remember to this day what she taught us that day. To this day, I remember. Predicate nouns follow linking verbs. Predicate nouns follow linking verbs. Now, here is a predicate noun. Follow in English, but here's your predicate noun. Follows linking verbs. It doesn't follow in Greek, but it does in English. And I knew that was one truth of grammar. She drilled it into us in one day. And I'm going to tell you something. If there was anything I could change about my education, it would have been that year in junior high school. That at the time, I didn't know what was best for me. And having taught Greek for decades now, when people say to me, I'm going to be taking Greek this fall in seminary, what should I do? And I always say the exact same thing to them. Learn English. Learn English. Because the greatest struggle I had in teaching people the Greek language in seminary. Because in seminary, I was blessed. I'm thankful to the Lord. I took Greek in college. And first year Greek was 4 days a week. First semester. Second semester was 3. So we did Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday for a semester, and then Monday, Wednesday, Friday for the second semester. Almost every time I've taught it, certainly on the seminary level, you have to cover all of, for example, the Mounts textbook, if that's what you're using, in one semester. So if you're teaching in an extension seminary, that means you have 3 hours once a week, functionally only 13 meetings to cover all that material. So in my experience, what I fought against in teaching Greek was teaching students to hate Greek rather than teaching them Greek. Most seminaries have given up on it. I'll just be honest with you. Most seminaries have given up on it, and you can get through your biblical requirements, your language requirements, by taking a Jan term class. In other words, you just learn how to use logos or accordance or whatever you're using, and they'll consider that to be good. I did my best to teach my students to love Greek, not to hate Greek, which is hard to do when you only have functionally. It was 15 meetings, not going to get much done the first week, and you got a final on the last week. So it's basically 13 functional days, 39 hours grand total to try to learn an entire language. And the biggest struggle people had was they were learning English while they were trying to learn Greek. They didn't know what a predicate nominative was. They didn't know what a direct object was or an indirect object was, or participles and infinitives. And so you're trying to learn twice as much as you should be. If you know your own language, then it's like, oh, that's how this language does that. And so it seemed to me, as I was listening to the conversation that took place, that the terminology that was being used would probably left most everybody without a clue as to what was going on. So I want to look at the prologue of John, a few other passages in the Gospel of John. We're just going to be doing some teaching today straight out of the text. And some people look at what's on the screen, it's just all Greek again, I'm not going to understand it. Yes, you can. Yes, you can. I keep reminding people, I forget to grab it, but it was a pink cover when Soli Deo Gloria Publications did it. But it was a book from the late 1600s. And in England, while people are dodging the plague, the real plague, not the fake plague with a 99.97% survival rate, but the real plague that had even in later years as much as a 20 to 25% fatality rate. And when it first hit, over 50%. Now that's a plague, okay? That's a run for the hills plague. And so people still living in a day where you not only had cholera and things like that, but you had real plague, and they're going in cities to learn this stuff. And by the third year of their education, they were not only expected to read what's on the screen, they were expected to be able to debate in the language on your screen. And that was in the late 1600s. We are a bunch of wimps in the 21st century. That's all there is to it. So I do not buy into I just can't understand. Yes, you can. If you will apply yourself, yes, you can. If you will turn off the music, if you will develop a attention span longer than CNN or Fox News thinks that you have an attention span, yes, you can. I challenge you. You can understand these things, and we will do our best to explain them. So we will begin with what's called the prologue of John. Now, I will tell you right now, there are good, solid scholars that would say nobody in the early church thought this was a prologue. Okay, that's fine, but I think logically, when you look at the breakdown of the text and what's being discussed, and you've got blocks of discussions and things like that, John 1 through 18 forms a logical introduction to the Gospel of John. And it is plainly intended by the apostle as his means of giving you an interpretive lens through which to look at the rest of the book. If you miss what's in the prologue, then you may miss what's in the rest of the book. Now, I want to remind everyone that skeptics, unbelieving skeptics, like Bart Ehrman, will say, well, it's obvious that John believed in the deity of Christ. I mean, that's his point is Mark didn't, and so therefore you shouldn't believe the Bible to be a consistent divine revelation from God. That's his argument. So that's why I've done an entire sermon series on the deity of Christ in the Gospel of Mark. It's right there on the surface too. But even someone like Ehrman will say, if you just let John speak for John, it's pretty obvious what John is saying. See, his idea is his problem's the idea of an overarching concept of inspiration. But he recognizes, well, John says it rather obviously, doesn't he? Well, he does. But, of course, various religious groups, anti-Trinitarian groups of very, very differing conclusions have found ways to try to get around that, and the prologue of John is certainly one of those areas. I've told the story many times of meeting with some Jehovah's Witnesses in someone's home. I was a second-year Greek student, so that would make this 1985-ish. Might have been 84, either late 84, early 85. Met with some Jehovah's Witness ladies in someone's home. And a Jehovah's Witness lady gave me about a 4 or 5 minute pre-memorized speech about the significance of why there is a blank spot right there. Why there is no article before the word theos in John 1:1c, which we're going to get to in just a moment. And I had with me at the time my Nestle-Aland 26th edition. We're at the 28th edition. They just announced 29th edition, and the 26th and the 6th edition of the UBS will be coming out a couple of years. They're working on that now. And so if you've looked at the Nestle-Aland text, you know that it has no English in it. If you're familiar with Jehovah's Witnesses, you know that they have a something called the Kingdom Interlinear Translation, which is an interlinear. So you've got the New World Translation on one side, the Westcott and Hort 1881 Greek text on the other side. And so I handed my Greek text over to the lady across from me in the conversation. I had it open to John 1:1, and I simply asked her, could you show me a Greek article? Now, she had just given me maybe 3 to 4 minutes pre-memorized speech about the significance of the article at John 1:1. But she didn't even know which way to hold the Greek text. She couldn't read a letter of it, let alone a word. This is the problem that we face, is that there are people who have an implicit trust in what they are told, but they can't check it out for themselves. And that's how these groups keep a hold on people. We, of course, invite people to check things out, but the Watchtower Society does not invite its people to critically analyze what it has to say. So let's take a look at our text, and let's break it down. Okay, let's start by breaking it down so that we can talk about what is called the clauses. Okay, so let's start with the clauses. So the first clause of John 1:1 is right here. So that's the A clause. All right, and so what I'm going to do is I'm going to make them different colors here. The B clause is the longest, right here. That's clause B, and we'll go with yellow for C. And here is clause C. All right. So there are your clauses for John 1:1. So, NRK ein halagos. In the beginning was the Word. That's A. B, kai halagos ein proston theon, and the Word was with God. And C, kai theos ein halagos, and the Word was God. Now, let's look at each clause. Let's make sure that we have a solid understanding of grammar, and let's make sure a single sentence can only answer so many questions. This single sentence is not left alone. This single sentence exists in an entire book. And so the challenge is always to accurately handle what is in the sentence, but then to see how it relates to the entire context. The primary problem with cultic, unorthodox interpretation is simple. The demonstration of the truthfulness of the orthodox understanding is found in the fact that I will use the same method of exegesis, interpretation, and translation for John 1:1 that I use for any other verse in the Gospel of John, including verses that simply say that Jesus went from one place to another, verses that say that Jesus waited a certain number of days before going to raise Lazarus, for example. And the point is that the demonstration of divine truth will be found in its consistency throughout the text. And what you discover is that the people who try to come up with novel ways of looking at texts like this very often can't even translate another text in the Gospel of John, let alone anywhere else in the New Testament. I have encountered innumerable Jehovah's Witnesses who could tell you an amazing amount of stuff about a verse like this. Take them 2 chapters later and they're lost, have no idea. Very few of them can actually teach and preach through the entirety of the Gospel of John or Mark or Luke or Matthew, for that matter. So, in the beginning was the Word. Now let's start with the beginning. So, NRK. And the vast majority of scholars will recognize that these are the same words that begin Genesis 1:1 in the Greek Septuagint. And so there is a understanding that John is referring to the same beginning that Genesis does. There are others who would want to try to limit this and say, well, it could be the beginning of the gospel, it could be the beginning of God's work with Israel, or whatever else it might be. But the fact that these are the same words used back in Genesis in the Greek translation is very, very important. Let's go ahead and look at logos for a second. Halagos. Logos, as a Greek term, has what is called a wide semantic domain. Semantic domain. What does that mean? Well, there are some words that are extremely narrow in their semantic domains. They will have a very small range of possible meaning. And then there are other words that have a very large range of possible meaning. And what you have to do by looking at the form they're used in, the context, things like parallels that the author might provide, where here in this large domain is the author putting my particular usage here. Logos has a very wide semantic domain. And so there are, it can simply mean things and matters and all sorts of stuff. Now, you will be told, if you pick up any commentary, that logos has a great deal to do with Greek philosophy. And it does. The logos is the rational principle. The rational principle in numerous of the leading Greek philosophers of the day. And so you'll find this in Philo, a contemporary, and so on and so forth. However, If this came from the Greek Septuagint, we also need to realize that the Logos likewise is found in the Memra, the Devar, the words of Yahweh. And so there had developed during it's in the Old Testament, and then there has developed in the intertestamental period this idea of the Word of God, the revelation of God, the speech of God. You'll find this in Psalm 119 and other places like that. And so you'll find argumentation in the commentaries as to where John is deriving this. I think you always have to default first and foremost to the Old Testament, to the Hebrew Scriptures, or in this case, the Greek translation, which of course is what John's going to be using all the way through anyways, as your primary source. You can give a nod to the Logos and Greek philosophy you want, but to think that John is going to make that his primary source, I think, is questionable, as popular as that might be. Now, let's look at the verb, and this is extremely important. Here is our verb, ein. Ein. Now remember the story that I told you. Predicate nouns follow linking verbs. Got to keep the whistle wet today. Predicate nouns follow linking verbs. There are two primary verbs of being in Greek. You have eimi and you have ginomai, which very often is found aorist in agenita. And you can see agenita right here, for example. There's agenita right there. These are the verbs of being. And in this instance, what's very fascinating is John very carefully in the prologue uses this form when he's talking about the Logos, and then he uses agenita when he's talking about anything else. So all things were made through him. So when he's not talking about the Logos, he uses agenita, which would have a point of origin concept to it. This does not have a point of origin concept. What do I mean by that? It's not saying the word began to exist in the past. Why? Because it's in the imperfect. Now, the simplest way in the Greek language to express an action, I didn't want you to do that, is called the aorist. Okay? The aorist is sort of your default. It seems to be the most ancient way in which the Greek language expressed an action. So the aorist frequently is a point action in the past. Sometimes it's just an action and it's not really defined. A present will have an emphasis upon continuous action ongoing as you're speaking. The imperfect, which is what we're looking at here, is continuous action in the past, which can have different aspects to it. And so you can have cumulative imperfects and cumulatives and ingressives and iteratives. So you could say, he used to teach in the temple, wherein what you're saying is he would teach in the temple, but he wasn't teaching in the temple 24/7. He was teaching in the temple a certain number of days or weeks, something like that, but that was a regular pattern that he was doing, okay? Or in John 6, John uses the imperfect to say that Jesus was saying to them over and over again, repetitively, you're not able to come to me unless the Father enables you to come. So these are different ways in which the language can express various actions. And what's fascinating is you'll notice in the second clause, there's your ein, and the third clause, there's your ein. So when the logos is being discussed in relationship to the Father and the arche, the beginning, the imperfect is being used, which does not point to a point of origin. As far back as you want to push the arche, the logos already was. Okay? The logos already was. As far back as you want to push this, however you interpret arche, the logos is in existence. So what does this tell us? What does the first phrase, the first clause, tell us about the logos? The logos is eternal. The logos is not a created being. The logos has not come into existence at a point in time. The logos has existence. We haven't defined it yet, but the logos was already in existence in the beginning. Logos is eternal. So, the second phrase, be, the be clause here, is the longest of the three. And the Word was with God. So we have the same verb now. And so if this is an eternal relationship, then this is an eternal relationship. The logos has an article. Here is the word the, ha logos, just as you had an article here. Ha logos. And by the way, we'll expand upon this in a moment. But when you have a linking verb, and ein is functioning this way, and you have a nominative, and you have a second nominative, as we'll have in the third clause. In Greek, the article tells you which word is the subject. So if you had God is light, all right? In Greek, the Greek language can tell you the difference between saying all of God is all of light, or God, the subject, is light, and light's the predicate nominative. How? Through the use of the article. So if neither noun, nominatives, remember in Greek you have what are called cases. And I'll just do this number here. It's sort of fun to do, though I'm going to have to clean the board eventually. In the Greek language, you will be taught two different ways. I was taught what was called the 8-case system. I now teach the 5-case system. What's the difference between the two? Has Greek changed? No. In the 5-case system is based upon the actual forms in the language. The 8-case is based upon the uses of those forms in the language. There are 5 forms, so it's easier to learn it that way and then learn the subcategories, but I didn't learn in the easiest grammar, so there you go. So you have the nominative, you have the genitive, you have the dative, and then underneath the dative, the subcategories of locative and instrumental. You have the accusative, and you have the vocative. Now, the nominative is the case of the subject. The genitive is an oblique case, possession. It can also have categories of direction, directionality, partitive, genitives, things like that. The dative is the indirect object when it's just being a dative. But then that same form can be locative, location, and instrumental, means by which something happens. I think one of the clearest examples of this is in when Paul says, God was in Christ reconciling the world to himself. It doesn't mean God as a person was in Jesus reconciled the world. It was God by means of Jesus, instrumental, reconciling the world unto himself. That's a good example of it. The accusative, which is what we will have right here, the famous, after my debate with Joe Ventilacion, the famous ton theon is just simply the accusative form of theos. And then the vocative was, you can sort of draw a line there, because there are very few pure vocative forms in the New Testament, and most scholars recognize that the vocative was passing away during the Koine period, during the first century. And so it was more of a classical thing, and it was being, the function of the vocative was being taken over by the nominative, as we'll see in John 20:28. All right. So these are your cases. And so ha is just simply the singular article the singular nominative article. So ha, logos, tu, logu, to, logo, ton, logon, etc., etc. So that's called declining, and then you have the plural forms. So you'd have hoi if it's a masculine, and then there are feminine forms, and there are neuter forms. And this is why it's best to know English before you start trying to learn Greek, because once you start getting into all those forms, it can be somewhat challenging to English speakers. So with that, so we have and the word was, and so we can see this is a nominative. It's coming before the linking verb, so it's the subject, and the word was. Then following this, we have what is called, there you go, pros ton theon. When you have prepositions, you have prepositional phrases in English under the table. These are frequently providing location, direction of movement. They're very, very important. Now, pros ton theon could be translated as face to face with, in relationship to. You've got to do something with it here, because we're being told that the Logos was, so there is existence. The Logos is in existence with God. And God here is articular. What does articular mean? Articular means has an article. Has an article. That's all. Most of the time, theos is ha theos and tu theou. And now, there we'll find places where, because you have a preposition, the author doesn't bother with the article. And one thing you've got to understand, that you will be led astray if you do not hear what I'm saying right now. The Greek article and the English article are not the same things. There are very few who teach and read Greek, coming from an English background, who have a sound, functional, natural capacity and ability with the Greek article. The only reason that I have any facility with it is because one of the projects, again, the advantage of doing this in college instead of seminary, I had time to do projects, research papers, things like that, learn the language more slowly, memorize vocabulary better. And I did, in one of my years, I did, was it 3 years? I did 3 or 4 years. I did a total of 7 with Dr. Baird. He had hair when I started and he didn't when I got done, so I felt really badly about that. But anyway, the others were in seminary. Thankfully, I had the same professor in seminary as well. He taught for Fuller here in Phoenix. But one of the projects that I did was on what's called Granville-Sharp's rule. And Granville-Sharp's rule is a syntactical study of a construction in the Greek language. It's relevant at Titus 2:13 and 2 Peter 1:1 that really illustrates just how different the Greek article is in the Greek mind than the word the. It's much richer. And there's so much more we'll probably see as we go down through the text. We'll probably see examples where articles can function as relative pronouns. And people who think that logos on here, or accordance on here, or PC Study Bible, or Olive Tree, or whatever, is enough to make them experts in the language, who don't read it, who don't sit down and read it. One of my favorite ways of preaching, I've done this many times, it's my favorite way to preach, it really is to take a chapter. I did John chapter 9. If you want to see how this works, go to Apologia, I don't know, about 2 or 3 months ago. And I think it was one of those situations where it was like a Saturday when Jeff needed me to fill in for him. Didn't have time to do a bunch of preparation on something else. Took John chapter 9, plopped the Greek text down, fresh read it from the top. No notes, read it. Then go back and use the text as the commentary. That is, for me, the most enjoyable way of dealing with the text. And if you can't do that, then you're not going to have an understanding of the range of uses of articles, when they can function as relative pronouns, how they're functioning in sentences. You can always tell when someone is trying to live read something and they don't know about this because, well, sometimes there's nothing you can do. You're going to end up jumping around. But sometimes they'll end up just completely missing something because the article that goes with the noun is 7 words one direction or the other from where it's supposed to be, normally before, obviously. Frequently, it just takes the place of the noun, becomes a pronoun. The Greek article is rich, it is deep, and hence is easily misrepresented by those who have an agenda in trying to insert something. And so we'll see that in the third clause here. But just be aware that that's coming. So the first clause, in the beginning was the word's eternal. And the Word was with God. So the Word has been differentiated from ton theon. All right? There is a relationship between the logos and ton theon. We've only gotten through 2 clauses. We're not even at the end of the sentence yet. All right? So, with that said, let's look at, in case I want to make some notes there, the most obviously, I want something really red. There we go. There you go. Hey, there's supposed to be 16 million colors on this thing, right? So let's we're going to need some space over here. So we'll leave the eternal part there. How'd that happen? I'm not sure how that happened. That was probably my jacket. That's pretty cool. Anyways, yes, I know it does. Yeah, it does. It doesn't even come off. It's great. Not like the old. I'm old enough to remember chalkboards, folks. You youngins don't have any idea what it sounds like to scrape your fingernails on a chalkboard. But everybody who's as old as me just went, because we all know. And there is no sound like that. I think it's just natural to the human being to go, when you think of scraping nails on a chalkboard. Anyways, and I don't think you can record it. You know, the sound of it on recording is like, big deal. But when it happens for real, only in Jaws? No. Oh, really? Thanks, Rich. I appreciate your adding to my lecture here. See, now you folks get to hear a little bit more of it because there's no glass between us. And so now you're starting to hear a little bit more of what I have to deal with all the time. All right, so John 1:1c. Let's read it in Greek word order. Kai theos ein ha logos. So, and God was the Word. Now, if you encounter anybody who says, and God was the Word, you immediately know you are listening to someone who cannot actually read Greek. Just that bluntly, I got to put that bluntly. Why? Well, like that 8th grade teacher. What if we put an article in there? Kai ha theos ein ha logos. What if we did that? Or what if we take that out? And what if this wasn't here? Kai theos ein logos. Those would be equivalent statements. They would be equivalent statements. And what they would do is they would make these two nominatives, because notice, logos is a nominative, the os is a nominative. They are in the subject case with a linking verb. And so if you take the article out or put an article before both of them, it turns the linking verb into an equal sign. And so all of God becomes all the logos becomes all of God. They become interchangeable. So when people tell you, well, there's no article before theos, and so that means it's a God, that's someone who can't read Greek. That's someone who can't read Greek because they don't understand this construction. Because if there was an article, it would be saying everything that the logos is, God is, everything God is, the logos is. They're interchangeable. If there was an article there. Well, there isn't an article there. And that's important to recognize. All right? So, you have what is called, and half the time, it's all just a matter of terminology, and once you understand the terminology, you discover that scholars are just saying simple things. It's good to demythologize scholarship, and that's really what education is. It's a demythologizing of scholarship. So this, you ready for theos here? This is an anarthrous pre-verbal predicate nominative. Wow. That sounds like you're really a smart person. All that means is it doesn't have an article. It's before the verb. And it's a predicate nominative. That is, it's in the nominative. But since this is the subject, it is in the predicate, predication, the verbal aspect of the sentence. Wow, that's not as complicated as it sounded, is it? And the problem is, very often, all of the conversation, people just sort of step away from and say, I don't know. I don't know what anarthrous preverbal predicate nominatives mean. But it's really not that difficult to figure out. So theos is anarthrous. And the big question is, why did John put it before the verb rather than after the verb? Why isn't it kai ha logos ein theos? Now, there are not a billion examples of anarthrous preverbal predicate nominatives in the New Testament to draw examples from. But, thankfully, this sentence doesn't exist as a fragment someplace without the rest of the prologue to go with. And you can find enough examples in secular Greek and outside of this particular example to make the assertion that the reason you have this form is that having said that the logos is eternal, And having said that the Logos has eternally been in communion with ton theon, now what you're doing by putting theos over here is you're saying, and the Word was eternally theos, deity. You're not identifying who the Logos is, you're identifying what the Logos is. And I believe that once you see this in light of the rest of the prologue, especially verse 18, this becomes clearly John's intention. But remember, anybody who says, oh, there needs to be an article here, does not understand the language. They do not understand what they're saying. They're trying, if there was an article here, this would teach what's called Sabellianism. It would actually conflate the persons of the Trinity. This way it doesn't, and allows John to describe the nature of the Logos. Now, there is no indefinite article in the Greek language. We have an apple, a bat, a car. We have an indefinite article. There is no indefinite article in Greek. And so when someone tries to say, well, it should be a God with a small g. Well, any capitalization and non-capitalization in an English translation is editorial. It's editorial. If I could pull up, I don't have it queued up, so I won't do it right now. Hold on a second. Let's see, Greek texts. Let me see. Come on, why doesn't... I hate Windows. Let's see if what this pulls up. No, I didn't want you to put it over there. I wanted you to put it over here. And it gives me blank and spins. Oh, there we go. Just took that long time. So here's what, this is Codex Sinaiticus. This is what is called uncial or majuscule Greek looks like. And you'll notice it is all capital forms. They've actually put spaces between words here. That's not what you would have if I had just simply a graphic of Codex Sinaiticus up. So the point is, it was all capitals for the first 900 years. There were no small letters. So our utilization of these types of things does not make any difference whatsoever. That is editorial all the way along. All the way along. So if you're going to say this is a God, then you have to be building in a huge amount of theology into John from the start. And you have to explain how this a God is eternal and eternally in communion with ton theon. Now, what we're going to discover as we get through the prologue is this is referring to the Father and the Son, as we will see in a moment. Wow. It's already after 3 o'clock. All right, so I'm going to have to pick up the pace here if I want to get through the whole thing. But I want people to understand. Now, then we have, and this has become an issue, and so I want to make sure that we discuss this. It is common for some Unitarians to argue that the use of this demonstrative hutos right here is somehow significant because they will say, well, some older English speakers said it or something like that. Look, hutos haute tuta. Hutos haute tuta. Those are the masculine, feminine, and neuter forms of this particular term. This is a masculine. Its antecedent is the logos. Now, if the prologue is going to tell us that the logos is personal, then there is no reason on the planet to render this as it or that thing or whatever else. But notice what comes right after is our same verb, the imperfect of I, me, ein, anarche, pros ton theon. So this one, who is as to his nature theos, was in the beginning with God. So what John 1:2 does is it takes from the clauses of John 1:1 and creates really a fourth clause. Because remember, the verse divisions, that two first showed up between those two words in 1555. All right, so it had been a long time since John had written these words. So this is really a continuation of what came before. This one, the Logos, who was as to his nature God, was in the beginning pros ton theon. This is the emphasis that is being made. So the Logos is eternal. The Logos has always existed. The Logos is not a creation. So, panta, all things, di autou, by means of him, through him. So this is one of those places where the preposition determines the use, the case of the following pronoun, autou, through him, egenita. Now, notice this is the first time that we have a different verb. We've had ein up till now because we were talking about the Logos. But now we're talking about panta, all things. We're talking about creation. And so John purposefully changes the verb. He will do this all the way through verse 14. When he talks about the Logos is eternal. He uses ein. When he talks about John, when he talks about the creation, he uses egenita. He uses genomai. The aorist form of genomai is egeneton. And so all things were made through him. And then there are two ways of translating the last portion of this verse. Kai chorus autou egenita ude hen ha geganen. Now, the Nessialan text puts a period right here. And hence, Nessialan editors are saying, and apart from him, nothing, uda hen, not one thing was made, period. Ha geganen, what was made, in him was life. All right? So that's the Nessialan interpretation through punctuation of how this should be understood. Now, of course, punctuation is editorial as well. There was almost no punctuation in any of the early manuscripts at all. And it's just a long line of capital letters. So it can be translated, and apart from him, nothing was made which has been made, period. Then in him was life, and the life, got to scroll this up here, was the light of men. So those are your two ways of translating this. But what's important for our purposes is here's egenita, here's egenita. We're no longer, the Logos is no longer the subject. What's being created is all things. And apart from him, nothing was made which was made. So now we're talking about the origin of the physical universe, or anything else for that matter, all other things. And these things are made through him. Through the one who was with God. So if you're going to say the Logos is some inanimate object, then all objects came about from an inanimate object because it's di autou, it's through him. This is the problem that every denier of the Trinity faces. They lose the Creator because the New Testament teaching over and over again is that creation takes place through Jesus. That's why the Jehovah's Witnesses have to put the word other into Colossians chapter 1 and say all other things were made through him because he himself has to be made. I guess you have to do the same thing here. If all things, this panta right here, can't really be all things if the Logos is a thing, an inanimate object. But it's not. So, get rid of our marks there. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. And the light is shining in darkness, and the darkness is not katelaben, can be understood as overcoming or comprehending, and it's quite possible in light of the poetic nature of this text that John wants the reader to struggle and to consider both. That's what he wants to do. That he uses a term. Remember, we talked about semantic domain? And so I think this is worth reminding you. Remember the semantic domain. So katela ben, you could have, it has a wider semantic domain. So overcome would be over here. Comprehend would be over here. Which one is it? Well, sometimes the author wants you to have to struggle with that. And sometimes the author wants you to believe both, to hear both, to interpret the text in light of both. And that's actually a really good didactic way of doing things. All right, so notice, egeneta anthropos, there was a man, apostolmenos paratheou, sent by God, and notice something, paratheou, no article. It's not to theou. That would be, have the article before the genitive form of theos. Remember, the meaning of theos is not changed by what case it's in, despite what Iglesia Ni Cristo would like you to believe. There is no difference whatsoever in the meaning. But this is para, and so like I said, there are a number of places where the author doesn't use the article because the preposition tends to particularize. It tends to make specific. So it can function basically as an article in that way. So there was a man sent from God whose name to him was John. Whose name was John? I don't know how to get rid of that thing. There we go. This one came eis martyrion, for a testimony. For a testimony, in order that he might testify concerning the light. He might witness concerning the light. Then we have a hina clause. Hina pontes pistou osin di autou, in order that all might believe through him. Now, let me just mention in passing, John never left Palestine. John, as far as we know, never left the Jordan River Valley. So you might want to recognize that pas pasapon, the word all, has to be interpreted in context. And the point is that God's purpose was that John's testimony would be believed, not that John would travel the world and everybody in the world would believe that testimony. Okay? You would think that would be a basic thing, but it's not for a lot of folks. Interesting, uk ein ekainos tafa. That one, John, was not the light. It's pretty clear from the New Testament, both from John and from Acts, that there continued to be, either you're very interested or something's going wrong. You're really fascinated. Okay, good. Rich is getting old like I am, and so he's leaning forward right now to rest his back. So that's actually what's going on. There is that too, yeah. Once I lose Rich, I figure I better start wrapping the whole thing up because it's we're done. It's clear that from John and Acts, disciples of John continued for decades. Remember, Paul, Acts chapter 19, runs into some of John's disciples far, far away from Israel. And so there is a concern in the New Testament to witness toward their conversion. That one was not the light, but he was sent, borrowing back from the preceding discussion, in order that he might testify concerning the light, which we're then going to get from John, and which you get in the other Gospels as well. That was the true light, that which is lighting all men by coming into the world. Now that's a text that has been interpreted in a number of different ways. Is he enlightening all men by means of coming into the world, or is it just describing the fact that is that true light which lights all men that came into the world? There are early church fathers. I'm going faster now because we need to get to 118. Try to do it in 90 minutes. I'm not even going to get to the rest of the verses I wanted to get to because I spent too much time in verse 1. He was in the world. Now notice, okay, so we're back to the true light. The true light. So John's testifying about the true light. So who is this true light? It's not John. Who did John testify of? Of Jesus. And so this true light was in the world. Oh, there's Ain again. That's interesting. But we're not talking about an eternal situation here. We're talking about he was in the world. And the world was made through him. So you've got Ain and Agenata in the same verse. The world was made through him, and the world did not know him. Now, there's a lot of discussion, and it'd be worthwhile spending time discussing it, but like I said, I'm moving a little bit faster now. Is this a pre-incarnate discussion? He was in the world, because it's going to say he came unto his own, and we're really going to get to the incarnation, verse 14. But could it be that verse 10, he was in the world, God was active in the world, through the Son, and the world was made through him. Who was the world made through in the previous verses? Through the Logos. The world was made through him, masculine, and the world did not know him. He came unto his own, ta idia, his own. And that, you'll notice, has an alpha, ta idia. That's neuter, his own things. And then it's hoi idioi. Notice the omicron, that's masculine. So, people recognize, he came unto his own things, the things he himself created. And his own people, because it's masculine, so it's personal, his own people did not receive him. There was a rejection. As many as did receive him, to them he gave exousion, authority, teknotheogenesai, to become the children of God. And then you have in a positive form, to the ones believing, aista anima autou, in his name. So obviously, you've got to see that the Logos here has been personified as the person of Jesus. And we're going to see how in verse 14. But it's already taken place. The idea that the Logos is some inanimate object, some inanimate thought or something like that, has now what? Taken on some kind of personal experience that has a name that you can believe in. He can give authority to become the children of God. These ones to whom authority is given to become the children of God, hoi, again, article now functioning as a relative pronoun, hoi uk ex haimaton, which ones, not out of bloods, literally, plural, neither ek thelematos sarkos, not by the will of the flesh, ude ek thelematos andros, neither by the will of a man, andros, normally, husband. But, so when you have uk, uda, not by this, not by this, not by this, a law, adversative, not, but, ek theou egenetheson, but they were born of God. Not of bloods, not of the will of the flesh, neither the will of the man, but of God. So whatever you do with John 1:13, it's very much the same thing that Paul said more than once. in regards to this particular issue of how one is born again. A lot that we could talk about there, but we're focusing upon the identity of the Logos. So, verse 14, and the Word became flesh. Kai halagos sarx egeneta. So notice now we have Logos, but now we have egeneta. Ain up till now, egeneta now. Why? Because the Word became flesh in time. The Word became flesh in time. The Word entered into flesh. This is the incarnation passage par excellence, along with Philippians chapter 2. The Word became flesh and eskenosen. Now, that was a very well-known verb that's used in the Old Testament of the tabernacle. To dwell in a tent. And he dwelt en hemin, amongst us. So there was a appointed time when the Logos became flesh and dwelt among us. He did not simply look like he did, but we saw. Etheasametha. It is to see with the eyes. We saw his glory. In fact, it's a glory, hos monogenes para patros. Monogenes is the term for unique, only begotten, unique as in having that singular relationship that no one else has. And here, this is a glory as of the monogenes para patros, the unique one, para patros. First point where John provides the beginning of our understanding of how to understand how the Logos can be with God and be himself theos in his nature, and it is not the Father. He is the monogenes para patros. So you have to ask yourself a question. If the Logos is not personal, how can he be the monogenes para patros? How can that work? This is personal language. Very, very personal language. He has the glory. Where does glory come from? God says he shares his glory with no one. Isn't it interesting that Paul will quote from that very text and identify Jesus as Yahweh in Philippians chapter 2. He has the glory of the unique one, para patros, from the Father, full of katatos kai aleithaios, grace and truth. Full of grace and truth. This is what we have seen. John is now witnessing himself. John testified concerning him and cried out, saying, "This is the one of whom I spoke." And if hutos is impersonal up above, why is it not impersonal here? Well, because its antecedent is clearly personal, just as it was before. This one is the one of whom I spoke. The one coming after me was before me, because he was before me. And he uses he uses emprosthen and uses protos, because he was before me as in temporally, and yet Jesus wasn't, not in birth. Even John recognizes that Jesus has an existence beyond his mere physical existence, which he has taken in the Incarnation. Because from his fullness we have all received, and grace, kaden anti katatos, grace upon grace, grace against grace, grace piled on top of grace, might be one way of understanding it. Because the law was given through Moses. Grace and truth, and notice it's didomi for was given through Moses. It's egeneta, which is the same word that was used for the creation. Grace and truth are made through Jesus Christ. So now he uses the full name of Jesus Christ in making this assertion. Now, here is the end of the prologue, and here's where we will go back to the board. So, this is called bookending. Bookending. So if John 1:1 is the start, John 1:1 is the start, then this is the end. And so we have the assertion. Now, let me talk briefly about this use of theos right here. If you have the King James, the New King James Version of the Bible, you will have the monogenes huios, the only begotten Son. And we've gone over this in the past. I won't go over it today. I will just simply point out to you that the two oldest manuscripts we have of the Gospel of John, P66 and P75, both have the word God. It's also found in the great unsealed text as well. It is a very, very early reading. And I believe it has the strongest backing behind it, because it would be much more understandable why a scribe would stumble at this phrase, monogenes theos. I mean, that's just, you'll hear people say, by the way, some King James onlyists will say, well, that's what the Gnostics said. No one has ever found anywhere in any Gnostic writing, to my knowledge, the phrase monogenes theos. Nowhere. That's been repeated so often by many of them that they think that that's there, but I've found no one who could show that to me. So we're going with the reading that is found in the Nestle-Aland 28th edition, and almost all of your modern translations will be utilizing the same reading. So we have theon udais heoraken popete. Theon is in the accusative and has no article. It doesn't say ton theon. It's just one of those places. Again, you don't have to use the article. It doesn't mean a god. If you think that the lack of an article should be translated as a god, then this should be translated, no one has seen a god at any time, which of course is nonsense. No one has seen heoraken, God, popete, at any time. Now, is that true? Not according to the Old Testament. Not according to the Old Testament. There are a number of places in the Old Testament where God was seen. Abram walked with Yahweh by the oaks of Mamre. Isaiah saw Yahweh sitting upon his throne. So, what do you mean, John? What do you mean no one has seen God at any time? Who has been seen? Monogenes theos. Now, off the top of my head, I think P75 has, is it ha? I think it has the article. I should have looked that up, but one of these two has the article. One of it has it, one it does not. But monogenes theos, the unique God, ha on. So here's where you have an article that is referring back to the preceding noun phrase. Then you have the participle of being, the one being, eiston kalpon to patros. So this is an entire phrase right here that is describing the monogenes theos. The one who is at the side, in the bosom of the Father. This is John 1:18's way of saying what is said above, the Word was with God. This is as personal and interpersonal phrase as can be. And if this is the bookend, John 1:1's the bookend on one side. John 1:18's the bookend on the other side. If this is repeating what's in John 1:1, and it is, then this is what it means for the Logos to be with the Father. Intimate, personal communion for eternity. Intimate, personal community and communion for eternity. That's what it means to be the monogenes theos. Right there. Ha, on, eis, ton, kalpon, tu, patros. I almost never hear the deniers of the deity of Christ dealing with the entire prologue, and I almost never hear them going here. Most of them don't know anything at all about textual criticism, so they don't even know what to do with the textual variant, but they never see how can you even begin to deal with John 1:18 outside of a Trinitarian context? I don't know. I have no earthly idea. I don't know how you can do it. No one has seen God in any time. Yes, they did. Who did they see? The monogenes theos, the one who is at the right hand of the Father, that by the Father's side, in the Father's bosom. That one, ekainos, exegesata, to exegete, to explain. He has explained him. He has made him known. He has revealed him. Now you understand Genesis chapter 19. Yahweh's walking with Abram by the oaks of Mamre. He sends the other two angels on to Sodom and Gomorrah. They're the two angels that come to Lot. And then what are we told in Genesis 19? Yahweh, the Yahweh on earth who's been walking with Abram, rained fire and brimstone from Yahweh in heaven upon Sodom and Gomorrah. Who did Abram see? Jesus. Jesus. He's the monogenes theos. You will never make heads or tails out of the Bible as long as you hold on to cultic denials of who Jesus is. You will never make heads or tails out of the Bible. And you will not make heads or tails out of the Gospel of John. We doing okay back there, Rich? We're doing good? Because I don't feel like stopping right now. Okay, because I got to do at least two others here. You want to see where John does this? Well, I'm not sure that I can go that long. So let's be nice, okay? John chapter 12 will prove this. John chapter 12 will prove this. Why? Because of this is at the end of Jesus' ministry. Because of this, they were not able to believe. Now, we could stop and look at that one and demonstrate that Leighton Flowers is an error yet again, which isn't difficult to do. Because again, Isaiah said, and then he quotes from Isaiah, he has blinded their eyes, made their hearts hard, so on and so forth. This is a quotation from where? Isaiah chapter 6. What's Isaiah chapter 6? Isaiah chapter 6 is Isaiah's temple vision. And then we have these words, and most people, honestly, just go flying right past this. They don't even see it. They're thinking, their mind's normally on, what do you mean they couldn't believe? But don't miss this. These things, Isaiah said, what did we just quote from? Isaiah chapter 6. The temple vision. What happened to the temple vision? I saw the Lord lofty and lifted up. The cherubim surrounding. What were they saying? Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh. Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. It's a picture of the worship of God in heaven. And then Yahweh speaks to Isaiah, who will go for us? These things Isaiah said because he saw his glory, and he spoke concerning him. Yet even some of the rulers believed in him. Who's the auton? Who they believe in? Jesus. Jesus. Only person in the context. But because the Pharisees, they weren't confessing him because they didn't want to be put out. These things Isaiah said because he saw his glory. Whose glory? Well, in Isaiah chapter 6, it's glory of Yahweh. So if you ask Isaiah, whose glory did you see in your temple vision, Isaiah chapter 6? Saw the glory of Yahweh. We slaughter that in English as Jehovah. That's not how it could have been pronounced, but we're talking about the covenant God of Israel. John, whose glory did Isaiah see? Jesus. Now, you know how there is absolutely no way around this. And I didn't know this for a number of years. If you want a little bit more on this, last year, right before the world stopped functioning normally, I preached a sermon at G3 from Isaiah chapter 6 and went over this. So if you want a further version, and then when I got back, I did it again at Apologia. So there's a couple versions of it running around out there if you'd like to take a look at it. But you know why this is absolutely, positively certain? Let me see if I can pull this up. Yep, it's down here at the bottom. It just doesn't come up as fast as what I'm used to, but it'll get there eventually. And let's blow the up nice and big. Oop. Always got to remember to turn that mask off or it's going to look really silly. And let me take you to Isaiah. Because there is a fascinating reality. Now, we're looking at the Greek Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Old Testament. This is what John quotes from. He's writing to Greek-speaking individuals. This is the Bible they have. And this is why most English speakers miss John 12:41 and what it's saying. And it's because in the Hebrew Masoretic text, Isaiah 6:1, off the top of my mind, in the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord, Adonai, lofty and lifted up, and it's translated a different way, the skirts or the trains of his robe were filling the temple. That's the Hebrew. The Greek's on the screen. It came about in that year when King Ozias died. I saw the Lord seated upon a throne, lofty and lifted up. Kai pleres ha oikos tes doxes autou. Let me make sure you see this. All right? I already got you. And the house got to hear the whoosh. All right. And the house, the oikos, the temple, was full tes doxes autou, with his glory. With his glory. So you see, the people to whom John's writing, who have the Greek Septuagint, who've been following what he said, and they looked up the reference that he gave in Isaiah 6. John then says, Isaiah said these things because what? He saw his glory. This is the only place in Isaiah where he sees the glory, using the exact same words. So everybody that got John's gospel, when he wrote it, knew exactly what he was saying. John said Isaiah saw Jesus on the throne in Isaiah chapter 6. That is not even disputable. That's not even disputable. Hence, it's not overly difficult then if we will just be fair. I could have gone to John chapter 8. In fact, I will just for a second because I want to make a point. Yeah. John chapter 8, verse 24. What does Jesus say? Therefore I said to you that you will die in your sins. For unless you believe, you need to believe. For unless you believe, hati ego eimi, you will die in your sins. This isn't just something to argue about on the internet. Jesus said to the Jews who were no farther away from him than this desk is only a few feet away from me. Unless you believe that I am, you will die in your sins. Well, what does I am mean? Well, Jesus says it here, and there's no great response immediately. But by the end of the chapter, you know what happens. You go to the end of John chapter 8, and things get hotter and hotter and hotter, and Jesus keeps pushing and pushing and pushing. And finally, verse 53, you're not greater than our father Abraham, who's died, and the prophets who've died. Who are you making yourself out to be? Jesus answered, if I glorify myself, my glory is nothing. It is my Father, the one glorifying me. It is my Father who is glorifying me, whom you say he is our God. And you don't know him, but I know him. Oof. Jesus was not attempting to de-escalate the situation. You say that to religious leaders. You say you know God. I do and you don't. Mm-hmm. If I said I didn't know him, I'd be a liar like you. But I know him and I keep his word. Your father Abraham rejoiced to see my day, and he saw it and was glad. When did that happen? When did that happen? I'll tell you when it happened. It happened in Genesis 18 and 19. And they knew exactly what he was saying because they knew who Abraham saw in Genesis 18 and 19. He walked with Yahweh. Jesus said, Abraham rejoiced to see my day. He saw it, was glad. Therefore the Jews said to him, you're not yet 50 years old and you've seen Abraham? Ipen autois Jesus, amen, amen, lego humin, prin Abraham genestai ego eimi. Before Abraham was, I am. And the Jews picked up stones to stone him. They knew it. If you deny the deity of Christ, you're not as sharp as they were, because they got it. Before Abraham was, I am. Now, it's not my purpose today to go into all the I am sayings, because I go into John 13:19, John 18:5-6. It's very plain. That's what John's presenting. We go back in the Old Testament, Isaiah's use of ego eimi. We can do all of that if we need to. I just want to get to one more text, and we will call it a day on the program today on the Gospel of John and its testimony to this issue. We could have gone into John chapter 17 and the high priestly prayer. There's a lot there. But after the resurrection, as you know, Thomas, one of the 12, called Didymus, was not with them when Jesus came the first time. The disciples told, we've seen the Lord. He said to them, unless I see in his hands the place of the nails and put my finger into his side, I will not believe. And then after 8 days again, they're all gathered together, Thomas with them this time, and Jesus comes with the doors being locked and stands in their midst and says, peace to you. Then he says to Thomas, put forth your finger. Here's my hand, Thomas. And take your hand. See where I've been wounded in the side. And notice what he says. Kai me ginu apistos ala pistos. And do not be apistos, without faith, but pistos, believing. Do not be unbelieving, but believe. Then we have these words, which again, I suggest to anyone that you ask a Unitarian, an anti-Trinitarian, whatever you want to call yourself, to explain this text. I have done so with Muslims, with Unitarians, with all sorts of folks. And they stumble all over themselves. Thomas answered. So Thomas is the one who's been addressed by Jesus. He has said, here I am. I wasn't here when you said you needed to see my hands and my feet and my side and so on and so forth, or you wouldn't believe. But I know what you said, not because somebody reported to me, because I'm God. And he says, do not be apistos, but pistos. And Thomas answered, and here's the key, folks. Thomas, Ipen, he said, auto. See this here? See that little iota subscript right there? That is the dative, and that is the iota subscript indicating the singular form. So this, he said to him. Why is that important? Because believe it or not, people will look at this next phrase. Hakuriasmu kai hatheasmu. My Lord and my God. And if you want to see how this worked, you can go, for example, watch the debate that I did with a Muslim apologist at the University of Johannesburg in South Africa a number of years ago on campus. And he's standing there and he says, and so what Jesus does is he goes, my Lord, my God. As if Jesus was going, my God. He said to him. Now, when you have Ipen, there's no punctuation. So in English, this would be a quote. Hakuriasmu kai hatheasmu. See, this is all said to Jesus. Auto, singular, right there. This is not disjunctive. That is not breaking anything. Hakuriasmu kai ha theasmu. My Lord and my God. Thomas identifies Jesus as his kurios, yes, but as his theos. My Lord and my God. Now, if Jesus is what people keep telling us, just a great teacher, moral teacher, whatever, then the next sentence should be, and Jesus rebuked Thomas and said, I am but Michael the archangel. I am but a moral teacher, whatever. Jesus says auto to him, to Thomas, because you have seen me, have you believed? There's the verbal form of pistos. Because you've seen me, have you believed? Blessed are those who having not seen, that's not on the screen, but have believed. No rebuke. There is perfect acceptance on Jesus' part of the description of Thomas, of Jesus as his Lord and his God. Now we've seen Jesus is not the Father. He is clearly differentiated from the Father. He says in his high priestly prayer in John 17:5, Father, glorify me with the glory which I had in your presence before the world was. There is a clear recognition on the part of the New Testament, John 14, John 17, clear distinction between Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. How will Jesus come and make his abode in his believers, according to John chapter 14? But by the Spirit. The Father and the Son will make their abode with them by the Spirit. There's no confusion of the persons, but there is no question. None. That John is presenting to us the fact that Jesus was the one seen by Isaiah. Jesus, the Logos, is the monogenes theos and the monogenes huios. He is both. And it was Jesus who said, unless you believe that I am, you will die in your sins. A lesser Jesus cannot save you. A lesser Jesus cannot save you. That's the importance of understanding this. Now let's what's the term now? Circle back? Is that the new circle? Yes, we got a circle. Not here? Not allowed? We don't do that here? Okay, Rich says we do not do that here. Okay. Let's go back to why is this important? We've done a lot of grammar and language and background and Greek Septuagint and all the rest of this stuff. Jesus was promised by the Father that the Father would give to him an inheritance of nations. And Jesus said, upon his resurrection and his ascension to heaven, go, because all authority has been given to me in heaven and earth. If he is who he claimed to be, if there is an empty tomb in Jerusalem, then every philosopher, every legal scholar, every military leader, every president, every king must recognize that he will someday stand before this one who rose from the dead. And the church has been called to disciple the nations. And it is our responsibility to tell the nations, Jesus Christ is Lord. Jesus Christ is Lord. And he will judge by his law. His law. See how it's important? There is a day coming. There's a day right now. There is we were so thankful to see Pastor Coates in his church on Sunday. I made the mistake of following a tweet that a friend from up there tweeted from someone who's in authority in the Alberta area. These people hate Pastor Coates. They want that church destroyed. They want it burned to the ground. They want every single person in that church in jail. The hatred of the world is astonishing. That's what they want. Pastor Coates was in jail for a month. There are pastors in China that have already been in jail for years and will be for years more because they dared to tell the Chinese Communist government, you will be judged by Jesus Christ. And if Jesus Christ was simply a moral teacher, or if Jesus Christ was anything other than the Lord of glory himself, then how can he be the one who will judge all people? How can he be the Lord of glory? How can he be what the New Testament describes him as? We have to accept all the Bible says, not just parts of it. And we have to be clear. What gives the martyrs and the testifiers down through history the power to stand firm in the midst of that persecution and, yes, that imprisonment is not that they're following a great moral teacher. There have been people of other religions that did that. But they are following their very creator, the one that Isaiah saw sitting upon the throne, the one who was in the beginning with the Father. That's why this is very important. So I hope this has been useful to you. I hope it has helped you. I hope that especially those of you who deal with Jehovah's Witnesses and other groups like that will take the time to walk through this, make sure you're familiar with the information, and be able to share it with others, and to be able to share it not just simply in a mechanical way, but in a passionate way, in a way that connects together the beauty of all of this. Thanks for watching. We'll see you again tomorrow, Lord willing. God bless.